Hi, I'm John Kursky. This is a Sleepy Atlas, and in part 2, I want to show you how to set up a template that we provide so that you can automatically query your semantic models in a service and run tests against those in the service using PQL.Assert. All right, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date on all the new videos and content and features we'll be coming out with in the coming weeks. And with that, in our last video, I showed you how to set up the custom connector that you can use in Power BI Desktop in order to query the Power BI REST APIs. In this video, if you have that connector already on your machine and in Power BI Desktop, what you can do then is query the PQL.Assert functions in your semantic models remotely through the execute DEX queries endpoint, which is a new endpoint released in early 2026 that allows you to run these tests. Now, in the past, this has been severely limited because the older endpoint execute query didn't have access or couldn't access a lot of the info functions. This new one, execute DEX queries in group, can. So up on my screen, I've got a workspace that has several models here that are using the PQL.Assert library. So I have my tests in my model. I've been running tests on those, and then I've moved this to, let's say, a production environment. Now, I also have a template file, which I'll provide as a link in the YouTube description, that walks you through, or just is kind of the easy button to leverage the connector to pull the information. If you saw the last video, there are a couple steps to be able to pull in information. This kind of shortcuts that, and then you can build off of it as you see fit. So if I click here, and I can click the download, and I'm going to open up the template file. Now, this is assuming I have the custom connector installed on this machine. So if you are watching this video and don't understand what that custom connector is, check the last video I did, which I'll put a link to at the end of this video, and it walks you through how to set it up. Okay, so I have fast forward through the sign-in process, so you don't have to watch the multi-factor authentication involved. But once that I signed in, now I can pick which workspace. So if I go back here, I can say that was my PQL.Assert demo. And then in this case, I can pick any environment. So if you follow the naming conventions for running tests, let's say I just want to run it against prod. And then I'm going to hit, you can hit load. So let's have that start off. Now, this is assuming I've got the custom connector loaded. And now what it's going to go do is reach out to the Power BI service and pull in the data sets, pull in the semantic models, issue which test exists in those semantic models using PQL.Assert, run those tests, and then it's going to show me the results. Okay, so this template, I've got my workspace, and I can see I've got the name of the tests, the test name, whether they passed or failed, what was the expectation, what was the actual value, and this makes it really simple. I can actually point it to multiple data sets in one call and see if there's any issues with my tests. And I specifically picked the production tests because maybe I don't want to run the dev tests against production semantic models. But how did this actually get put together? Well, if I go to transform data and I peek under the hood, you can see I've added the execute DAX queries in group. This is coming from the function catalog. The parameters that I set when I had that pop up originally are here, and I can always change those if I want to. And then what it does is it originally pulls in the group, then it pulls in the data sets, and then it's going to pull in the tests. Now there's a couple of steps that are involved in between, and I've set this up so that you can kind of see them. When it goes and retrieves the tests, it's got the data sets here, and it's actually running, when I call that execute DAX queries function, it's running the evaluate PQL.Assert.retrieve test by environment. Now, if I tried to use the old execute queries in group functions, this wouldn't work, because underneath the hood, I need the info function for annotations. And there's info functions and other tests that we have for PQL.Assert that those info functions would come back with a 400 error if you use execute queries in group. Execute DAX queries in group doesn't have that issue. Now, it called that, and then I just expanded the table that came back from this call. Now, in this endpoint, which is different from some of the other endpoints, is instead of just returning JSON back, it has to parse the arrow IPC format and then convert it to a table. So that way it's in a format that we can actually work with in Power Query. So we've got the table of data, and then we've got our tests. So if I was to run the same query against the model locally or in the service using DAX Query View, you'd see that this table comes back for each one of the models. So once I have that, the next step I take is I'm going to filter out the impersonation step. I don't want to get into that for this video. And then I'm going to start building out a test call column. Now, what the cool thing about this execute DAX queries is, let's say I have 10 tests, and 3 of those tests are for one semantic model. Now, what I could do is call each test individually with execute DAX queries in group. But execute DAX queries in group also lets you run multiple evaluate functions. So I can actually run multiple DAX queries and get multiple values back. That is a pretty cool thing. It makes it more efficient. So instead of making 3 calls to one semantic model, I can make 1 call, which is always more efficient from a standpoint of Power Query refreshes. The less round trips, the less API calls, the less issues you're going to run into. Now, I've got this where it's building those tests together, and then I group them. So that way for each semantic model, which is synonymous with dataset ID, I have the tests built out where I indicate, run this test, here's the test suite that it's associated with. And so that way when I get it back, I kind of understand if I have a failure for a test, what test suite did that come from? And then I'm going to run the query. So execute DAX query, it passes in the group ID, the dataset ID, and then that as the combined evaluate. And I get the results. I can expand on those results. And at this point, I've got whether they passed or failed. And then I move this into test results so that I can do some formatting, like whether or not it's passed, or I have an integer value for conditional formatting that you see with the red background. But the really cool thing about this is now I can actually point to a bunch of semantic models using PQL.Assert, get which tests exist in that model, then issue against the model. And this is reproducible for anything using PQL.Assert. So you don't have to write custom scripts to kind of run tests individually. As long as you're following PQL.Assert, you're doing the naming conventions correctly. Whether you have 2 tests or 10, or over time, if you add 10 tests, it will, when you hit refresh, it will know that there's 10 tests to run, or there's 2 tests to run, depending on how you've registered your tests in the semantic model. And that is the power of having those UDFs and PQL.Assert, is the tests live with the model. And then with this custom connector, whether I add a new semantic model, a new test, this can just go out, run, get which tests exist, run those tests, and then tell me centrally in a dashboard or a report which tests are passing or failing, and I'm not having to run this all the time manually. And this makes monitoring for a workspace admin really nice. Now, if I have access to stuff like a Fabric capacity or like a Fabric notebook, maybe I'll try to use some of the other templates I have out there to do the same thing. But if I just have a semantic model and I need to be able to run these tests, this kind of custom connector opens the door for you to be able to run these tests against your model, inventory your workspaces, and then get other information. So we can be a little more analytical in the work that we do. So often when we are building reports and dashboards and capabilities for customers, we're building KPIs and metrics for them. We should hold ourselves to the same standard, and tools like these help us run analytics and leverage great tools like Power BI Desktop to be able to run tests, find out the tests that are often failing, be able to tell somebody at a moment's notice what semantic models may be failing, why they failed, what are the number of data sets that you're responsible for, what are the number of reports you're responsible for. All these are numbers that we should be able to quickly quantify leveraging Power BI Desktop, and this custom connector allows that. So I hope you learned something today. We went over a template, a PBIT template, which I'll provide in the YouTube description so that you can download that. If you have the custom connector set up, you can point it to a workspace, have the custom connector and that template query the Power BI workspace, get the data sets, issue the PQL.Assert test commands through execute DAX queries and groups, and show you the test results. And this is a template that you can use to start with, and you can modify it to your heart's content. Also, keep in mind that that custom connector is under MIT license, so if you want to make edits for your own environment, feel free to do so. And then one last bit, for anyone who's watching this, for those templates and the URLs I provide in the YouTube description and are working in GCC, I do have an equivalent a version of the custom connector and a template for GCC users. So just please feel free and reach out if you're interested in getting access to the GCC templates. And until the next video, take care.